Okay, picking up with the middle of Perelandra, where we left off in class. I want to back up for a moment to page 121. And at the bottom of that page, Ransom is speaking with the body of Weston and the Green Lady. And Ransom says, "Is Maladil a beast that we can stop his path, or a leaf that we can twist his shape? Whatever you do, he will make good of it, but not the good that he had prepared for you if you had obeyed him. That is lost forever. The first king and first mother of our world did the forbidden thing, and he brought good of it in the end. But what they did was not good, and what they lost we have not seen. And there were some to whom no good came, nor ever will come." And then he turns to the body of Weston and says, "You, tell her all. What good came to you? Do you rejoice that Maladil became a man? Tell her of your joys, and of what profit you had when you made Maladil and death acquainted." Now in that little section, what Lewis is doing is he's essentially raising the same issue that we saw Tolkien raise at the beginning of the Silmarillion in the music of the Ainur, where Tolkien shows us the Ainur and we see Melkor singing and creating his own chord, weaving his own chord into the symphony, so to speak. And his chord is at odds with Eru Ilúvatar's, and so Eru Ilúvatar weaves Melkor's music into his own, showing that no matter what Melkor attempts to do, Eru, or God, always has the upper hand. He turns everything to good. Ransom here is saying the exact same thing, that no matter what we attempt to do, God will make good come of it. But then notice how he turns that, and he says, God makes good come of it for all things, except for you, except for the unman, except for Weston. And once he does that, and once he says, what good came of Christ becoming acquainted with death? For you. And we get this wonderful kind of horrific description. The body that had been Weston's threw up its head and opened its mouth and gave a long and melancholy howl like a dog. And immediately the lady lies down and goes to sleep. She falls asleep, and then the unman goes and sits next to her and squats down. Very similar to what we see Satan do in Paradise Lost. And bear in mind, this is kind of Lewis's retelling of Paradise Lost, according to what he said in his book, A Preface to Paradise Lost. And so we see the body of the unman squatting down next to the Green Lady like a toad. And we get the end of that paragraph on page 122, the middle of the page. Ransom was chilled with an inarticulate night nursery horror of the thing he had to deal with. The man-aged corpse, the boogie, the unman. In other words, a zombie-like creature, which we obviously don't have in real life, and this is a nightmare that we all have. And now Ransom is face to face with the archetype behind the nightmare, the real thing. And then we just start to hear the unman calling out, "Ransom, ransom, ransom." And every time Ransom responds, "Nothing, ransom." "What?" "Nothing, ransom." "What?" "Nothing." Showing the idiocy, as Lewis calls it, of hell. And then on page 123, there's a fairly long passage where Ransom is thinking, and we're told he taught himself to keep silent in the end. Not that the torture of resisting his impulse to speak was less than a torture of response, but because something within him rose up to combat the tormentor's assurance that he must yield in the end. If the attack had been of some more violent kind, it might have been easier to resist. What chilled and almost cowed him was the union of malice with something nearly childish. For temptation, for blasphemy, for a whole battery of horrors, he was in some sort prepared. But hardly for this petty, indefatigable nagging as of a nasty little boy at a preparatory school. He thinks he's prepared for the unman to assault him with some kind of great temptation or some kind of great horrific images, but he's not prepared for the simple banality of pestering. Okay? He goes on, our narrator goes on. On the surface, great designs and an antagonism to heaven which involved the fate of worlds, but deep within, when every veil had been pierced, was there after all nothing but a black puerility, an aimless, empty spitefulness content to sate itself with the tiniest cruelties, as love does not disdain the smallest kindness. Well, where have we seen some of those tiniest cruelties? Earlier, when Ransom wakes up and he sees one of the frog-like creatures with its back ripped open, and he walks along and he sees another, and then another, and then another, and then he sees Weston inserting his nail and ripping the back open. That kind of cruelty. So all through the night, Ransom hears, ransom, ransom, ransom. Let's see. He falls asleep and then wakes up again. And they're having a conversation again. Weston and the lady. And Ransom looks at the lady, and we're told on page 127, he now has a new image of her, like a tragedy queen. By earthly standards, an expression to be praised, even to be revered. But remembering all that he had read in her countenance before, the unself-conscious radiance, the frolic sanctity, the depth of stillness that reminded him sometimes of infancy and sometimes of extreme old age, while the hard youth and valiancy of face and body denied both, he found this new expression horrifying. Whereas before, whenever he saw her, he witnessed innocence and both a wisdom that would come with age. Now he sees there's something precarious. And he starts to think, this can't go on. Something must happen. Something must stop this. But he doesn't know what. Okay? So they go on into the forest underneath the rain. So they get out of the rain. And we're told, page 128, right in the exact middle of the page, Ransom is looking at the unman and such, and we're told he had full opportunity to learn the falsity of the maxim that the Prince of Darkness is a gentleman. And skipping another sentence, it was not like dealing with a wicked politician at all. That is, Ransom's dealing with the unman. It was much more like being set to guard an imbecile, or a monkey, or a very nasty child. It showed plenty of subtlety and intelligence when talking to the lady. That is, the unman, when talking to the lady, it has a goal, it has a purpose. It wants to subvert her, it wants to pervert her. And so it uses all the tools at its disposal. But when she's asleep or absent, it has no desire to use those tools. Why? Those tools are of another's making. They're of God's making. And it has no desire to have anything to do with God. But Ransom soon perceived that it regarded intelligence simply and solely as a weapon which it had no more wish to employ in its off-duty hours than a soldier has to do bayonet practice when he is on leave. Thought was for it a device necessary to certain ends. The perversion of Perelandra. But thought in itself did not interest it. It assumed reason as externally and inorganically as it had assumed Weston's body. Now why is that? Because what is inhabiting the unman has denied its creator, has denied the source of its being. It has denied the source of all reason and all logic. And in denying those two things, logic and reason, it has no use for them. All right? Ransom goes on thinking, and we hear the voice continually saying, ransom, ransom. And at the bottom of 129, every now and then, we're told, Weston returns. That is, the soul of Weston reanimates, re-inhabits, whatever you want to call it, arises from being repressed. And we're told that Weston says, you better be careful, Ransom. I'm down in the bottom of a big black hole. No, I'm not, though. I'm on Perelandra. I can't think very well now. But that doesn't matter. He does all my thinking for me. It'll get quite easy presently. That boy keeps on shutting the windows. That's all right. It'll soon be all right now. Okay? He doesn't really understand what's going on. But we're told later on, as this kind of conversation or dialogue, monologue of Weston's continues, about a third of the way down on 130, that Ransom discovers that any hatred he had once felt for the professor was dead. He found it natural to pray fervently for his soul. In other words, Ransom is praying for the soul of his enemy. Why? Because the soul of his enemy is no longer in control. Weston is no longer really the one doing the tempting. And yet what he felt for Weston was not exactly pity. Now, as the frightful abyss which parts ghosthood from manhood yawned before him, pity was almost swallowed up in horror, in the unconquerable revulsion of the life within him from positive and self-consuming death. In other words, Weston has become, in a sense, that miserific vision that Ransom has already described, that all faces would flee from. And we're told at the end of that paragraph, the forces which had begun perhaps years ago to eat away his humanity had now completed their work. Similar to those forces which had begun eating away not the humanity but the hobbitness of Gollum. Complete their work there on Mount Doom. The intoxicated will which had been slowly poisoning the intelligence and the affections had now at last poisoned itself, and the whole psychic organism had fallen to pieces. Only a ghost was left, an everlasting unrest, a crumbling, a ruin, an odor of decay. And Ransom suddenly thinks, and this might be my destination or hers. That is, what has happened to Weston might also happen to me. And then even more importantly than that, it might happen to her. Ransom knows he has sin in him. He is full of sin. But Tenedril, the Green Lady, does not. Middle of 131. Ransom keeps thinking of now the conversation between Weston and the Green Lady. And he sees what Weston is attempting to do, or the unman. The whole point of her action, the whole grandeur, would lie in taking it without the king's knowledge, in leaving him utterly free to repudiate it, so that all the benefits should be his and all the risks hers. And with the risk, of course, so all the magnanimity, the pathos, the tragedy, and the originality. Because keep in mind, what the unman is attempting to do is he's attempting to get the Green Lady to transgress the law against sleeping on the fixed land. He's trying to get her to think that by breaking that law, she will actually secretly be following the law that Maladol wants her to